Florida has an iconic natural environment. It's surrounded by oceans, built upon aquifers, shot through with rivers and lakes, and is dependent on clean water running through all those systems. From the Panhandle to the Florida Keys, you're never more than 60 miles from the beach. Florida's coasts serve as treasured sanctuaries and economic engines. They're places to enjoy as well as earn a living and build a life. I'm a proud sixth-generation Floridian, and I love calling Florida home and raising my family here. South Florida is home to the Everglades, one of Florida's most beautiful and ecologically important landscapes. The ocean and the Everglades are deeply interconnected. What happens offshore has an impact inland, and what happens here in our community has an impact out on the water. I wanted to hear the story of this connection from the people who know it best, my fellow Floridians, fishermen, policymakers, scientists, and advocates. Never have Florida's waterways, coasts, wildlife, and wetlands been as fragile and under threat as they are today. At this crucial moment, I'm journeying across South Florida's natural world, exploring the connections, revealing the stories, and searching for hope. Florida's coral reefs, officially called the Florida Coral Reef Tract, are a natural jewel of enormous proportions. From end to end, they stretch 360 miles, making this tract the largest reef system in North America and the third largest in the world. These once mighty coral reefs are in trouble. They are facing threats from all sides: disease epidemics, waters warming from climate change, ocean trash, and ocean acidification. With freshwater flows interrupted and nutrient pollution abundant, much of the decline of Florida's coral reefs and other marine habitats starts on land. Ultimately, if the Everglades is sick, the coral reefs and marine waters are also sick. Their fates and futures are intertwined. So that's one of the most amazing things about Miami is you can just jump in the water and be snorkeling within eyesight of downtown, you know? It's incredible to be here with the mangroves, the seagrass. On the other side of Key Biscayne, there's the reefs. You know, talk a little bit about the interconnectedness of the water that we have here in South Florida.
Oh, it's a fantastic marine ecosystem. The coral reefs are furthest offshore, and then we have the mangroves that help protect the land. And then we also have the seagrass, and both seagrass and mangroves are nurseries for juvenile fish and other invertebrates. Seagrass also helps filter water and keep sediment in place and prevent erosion. Mangroves are phenomenal places. I mean, not just for us, but they help protect the land. They help protect from flooding. They stabilize sediments. They also store carbon, which in this day and age is of critical importance. And all of these organisms, a great deal of marine organisms will spend their life in, if not one or if not two, in all three habitats at some point in time.
As recently as the 1970s, some parts of Florida's seafloor were 50% covered by living corals. Today, that number is only 6%. With freshwater flows interrupted and nutrient pollution abundant, much of the decline of Florida's coral reefs and other marine habitats starts on land. And so what are some of those stressors that we're seeing, impacting these corals?
Well, unfortunately, climate change is really one of the biggest threats that coral reefs face today, in part because of the way that it interacts with so many other stressors that have already been piled on top of coral reefs, like nutrient pollution.
So what kind of nutrients are we talking about when we're talking about nutrient pollution that might impact these corals?
Primarily it's nitrogen that we're dealing with, from things like lawn fertilizers, leaking septic systems, agricultural runoff, stormwater runoff, things like this. In fact, if we take a look here at this photograph, so this is a microscope picture that we took here in the lab. The golden brown color is also very interesting. This color is not coming from the animal, it comes from a community of algae. These are microscopic single-celled algae that live inside the cells of the coral and provide the animal with most of its food every day.
Right.
This is a reciprocal partnership. So the coral gets all this food, and in return, the coral provides the algae with nutrients and a place to live. So under the conditions that this partnership evolved, it was in very low nutrient waters.
Right.
So normally the coral is the only source of nutrients for these algae. And this helps the coral to keep the population of algae in balance. But when there's all this excess nutrients in the water, because of those factors that we just talked about, the coral is no longer the only source of nutrients for the algae and no longer has that sort of control over its own algal population.
Right, and that's what leads to bleaching as the coral expels the beneficial algae that live, or creatures that live within its structure.
Yeah, precisely. So that coral bleaching, that term, refers to the breakdown in this partnership between the coral and the algae.
So what can you tell me about the impacts of freshwater inputs as a factor in coral health and the health of the Florida coral reef tract?
So the freshwater inputs through the Everglades and then on through the Florida Bay really impact the Florida reef tract as well. All of these ecosystems are interconnected. So the Everglades onto the mangrove forests, onto the seagrass beds, they're acting as nutrient and sediment traps, and their health directly influences the ability of these corals to persist. So without the freshwater inputs into the Florida Bay, we're seeing seagrass die-offs, we're seeing all kinds of problems. On the flip side, when they do release pulses of fresh water through, it's bringing excess nutrients now. So we've interrupted the natural flow of this system. It should be a sort of a constant, slow-moving river. And that allows the ecosystem to act as that nutrient and sediment trap, which then allows the cleaned water to reach the Florida reef tract. But when they release these pulses, it brings a lot of these excess nutrients with it, sort of overwhelming the capacity of the ecosystem to serve as that sponge. So these nutrients then end up reaching the ecosystems and causing these blooms of algae and other problems.
You know, given this whole smorgasbord of potential threats to the Florida coral reef tract, are you optimistic that we are going to be successful in protecting it and in potentially restoring it?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because after this litany, it can feel a bit doom and gloom. And I won't lie, there are days when it does weigh heavily on me. But the fact that it has gotten to this point is unfortunate, but there are now so many pairs of eyes looking at the problem from all different kinds of angles that I am confident that we're going to be coming up with some important solutions that can really give these reefs a fighting chance.
The coral reefs, the seagrass beds, the coastal mangroves, and the freshwater wetlands, they all depend on the Everglades, a constant, steady flow of fresh, clean water. Without that, and without a healthy Everglades, Florida's marine environments cannot thrive. Flamingo is the end of the road. It's deep in the heart of the Everglades, right at the edge of Florida Bay. This is where fresh water meets salt water, and the two interact. As sea levels rise, this is the front line. That's why we've come here. I wanted to see it for myself. Florida Bay and the southern Everglades have been shaped by forces both large and small. Global ice ages, massive hurricanes, and even the deposits of centuries of microscopic algae have all played a role in creating this place. The result is a spectacular wonderland for fish, wildlife, and people. The The health of the ocean depends on what happens in the Everglades. If the Everglades is sick, the ocean and coastal environments of South Florida will be too. The stories of sea level rise in the coastal Everglades are echoed in Florida's cities. Fresh drinking water wells are becoming salty. Homeowners' septic systems are failing from saltwater intrusion. And in Miami, the streets are now regularly flooded from king tides on days that are perfectly sunny. The consequences of sea level rise could be dire for the Everglades. If sea levels rise just a few feet, vast portions of the Everglades could end up underwater. Even more important than flooding is what happens underground. As sea levels rise, the landward march of saltwater through Florida's porous limestone will taint the very freshwater aquifers that provide drinking water for millions of Floridians. Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing with respect to rising sea levels and climate change related impacts, so rising water temperatures also, and how that's impacting the fishery, but also how sea level is impacting the Everglades.
So this place is fairly unique in the sense that if there's too much salt water, it's called hypersaline. And that hypersalinity scenario causes algal blooms. And it does it here specifically because we don't have tidal influence in the center of the bay. From east of Snakebite all the way over to Blackwater Sound, there's no tidal influence. And so that water sits. And when it becomes too salty, that hypersalinity causes this very specific algae to grow. And it creates a green fog. That green fog blocks the sun. It sucks out the oxygen, and then the grass dies. And you know from your fishery that when the grass dies, there's no fish. So we're looking at entire areas of the bay that are dying when we have hypersaline situations. And we're already existing in a hypersaline situation. Because we don't have that freshwater flow from the northern part of the Everglades, the bay is already hypersaline just on an average day. And so if you combine that with no rain or excess sea level rise or a south wind that holds salt water in here, and that creates that petri dish that caused all those problems in 2015.
So what's the highest level of elevation in the Everglades?
Oh my God, I think it's 3 foot.
Yeah, 3 foot. I think it's up at Rock Reef.
That's right.
Yeah.
Rock Reef Pass is the highest part of the entire Everglades, and you know, it takes a lot to climb up it. It's all 3 feet.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, from a layman's terms, if you were driving on the street, you really couldn't even tell the difference.
Yeah. South Florida's geology offers little protection against rising sea levels. Throughout the Everglades, vast stretches of land rise only a few feet above sea level, and the porous limestone that lies underfoot can do little to hold back the salt water. The signs of sea level rise are emerging everywhere. Freshwater marshes collapse as saltwater pushes inward. Mangroves march inland. The vegetation and the soils tell an ominous story, and the consequences of sea level rise have only just begun. So sea level rise, climate change, water quality and abundance, freshwater, fisheries, all of these things are interconnected in Florida. And speak to that interconnectedness a little bit.
Every single person in the state of Florida, and every single person that lives in a coastal community in this country is connected to the water. And so when you have issues like sea level rise, like stormwater drainage, sewage problems, fertilizer problems, global warming that causes issues for the water, all of that is connected to your health and the livelihood that you depend on. I mean, it just is, there's no way around it. So the connectivity is greater than just sea level rise or just sewage, stormwater runoff. It's more about our livelihoods and our quality of life and how that water is connected to everyone.
So tell me what you hope the Everglades and Florida Bay looks like in 20 years.
In 20 years, I want to see this bay healthy again. I want to see freshwater flow. I want to see fish. I want to see an industry that's revolving around us. I want to see communities that are educated and aware of water issues and are sensitive to our effects on them. And if we can get there, then we'll see a healthy state, a state that can combat sea level rise and climate change.
The ocean is changing at a rapid pace, and these changes will not stop at the ocean's edge. They bring new risks to the Everglades, its animals, and its entire food chain. It's also a looming challenge for the millions of people who live here. If we are to secure a future for the Everglades, the salt marshes, and the mangroves, we cannot ignore the changes happening in the ocean. Just as the creeks and tides flow endlessly between them, their fates are intertwined. Hidden in the thick mangrove forests and beneath the water's surface, nature uses creativity almost beyond our imagination. Even when facing impossible conditions, nature finds ways to endure. Humans, like nature, must use our creativity to meet these challenges. These incredible environments are giving us clear warnings about the future, but our fate is not sealed. We have a choice. To secure the future we all want, we must act.
And you've done a couple of events already together.
So tell me a little bit about your connection to Biscayne Bay and this water right here that we're seeing. I mean, you grew up here in South Florida.
Oh, and we would always be so happy to be coming out on the water.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that the new generation, they're cognizant of the environment, but what South Floridian didn't have a boat or knew somebody who had a boat?
Exactly.
And those were your best friends.
Right,
somebody with a boat.
Yeah.
It's like somebody with a pickup truck when you need to move.
That's right.
But everybody loves to come out on the water.
Yeah.
And being on the water just makes you an environmentalist because you see how important it is to our economic future.
Right.
And we've had some scares. We've had a lot of environmental issues and problems, but and this sea level rise is a real problem for Miami because we've built right up to the water. I mean, look at all these buildings.
What do you see for the future specifically of Biscayne Bay? I mean, looking forward 20 years, say. You know, you've got sea level rise, you've got harmful algal blooms, you've got water quality and water abundance issues. You've got the whole suite of issues that come with comprehensive Everglades restoration. So, what's in the future for Biscayne Bay? Is it a rosy future?
I think it is a rosy picture if we are wise about it and if we invest the money now. But if we think that the problem is going to take care of itself, again, it's like maintenance on a boat. If you think that, hey, I'm not going to take care of this problem because I won't go out on it for a couple of months, it's only going to get worse and more expensive. The future is rosy if we spend the dollars to make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, and that we educate the next generation of how to take care of it.
Yeah.
It costs a lot of money. That's the only way we're going to get a rosy picture. We want to have a vibrant economy, beautiful beaches, a great Everglades, and wonderful canals. You can't do harm to one and not think that you're not harming the others. So we're all interconnected, and our waterways is what keeps Florida the jewel that it is.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to find hope for the future of Florida, you can find it right in Biscayne Bay in the shadow of Miami. Several of the Everglades restoration projects are happening right along Biscayne Bay. These projects are just one small part of the larger multi-decade and multi-billion-dollar effort. Here we can see Everglades restoration in action firsthand, including how it will benefit the ocean. So we're here today to talk about Biscayne Bay restoration and, the connections between freshwater and marine ecosystems. But if we're talking about marine ecosystems and saltwater, what are we doing so far upland? It feels like we're practically in the woods here.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, our inshore wetlands are really part of our coastal wetland ecosystem here in South Florida. And unfortunately, we've seen those ecosystems decline over time. And that's due to a number of reasons, urbanization and development here in this region. And really over time, with the channelization of the Everglades, we just saw increased draining and decreased freshwater flow. So we're working with what we got here in South Dade at the Deering Glade Preserve, trying to just restore these little parcels where we can under the Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands Project.
Right. So you mentioned that the Deering Glade Preserve that we're at here is not just a restoration project, but it's a rehydration project. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Right, so the idea is that we took this area that was a land mass, and this project has been spearheaded by the South Florida Water Management District, and they acquired the property, which didn't look like this several years ago. This project was completed in 2012, and they were able to take land that was not a wetland and was a coastal wetland previously and rehydrate it back to its former state. So overall, trying to increase the flow of fresh water from the canal system into the bay through this coastal wetland area.
Right. So the water is actually flowing this way, which is northward. Is that right?
Right, right.
So it's kind of making a loop here in a sense.
It's making a loop, and this is a man-made construction, so it's never as good as the real thing, right? So we're really just trying to mimic what Mother Nature originally had here, and that's very challenging to do, but we are starting to see some positive effects. We're starting to see our sawgrass ecosystem come back up. We're starting to see decreases in salinity, so by 9 PSU, I've been told.
Okay.
And those are really great numbers for us, because it's really going to make a difference in the ability of the ecosystem to bounce back and to move more towards that brackish ecosystem that's so important for our recreational and commercial fisheries and the other ecosystems that rely on it.
Unless clean, fresh water can finally return and reach places like Biscayne Bay and Florida Bay, these natural areas will continue to suffer. Clean water isn't just about the fish, dolphins, birds, and manatees. It's about people and our quality of life. It's about whether our communities will have natural places where we can play, raise our families, and enjoy the wonders of the outdoors. It's about keeping alive the heart of the natural Florida that inspires us. The beauty of this place inspires me, but so do its people. We are a diverse community. We come from many places and backgrounds, and when it matters most, we all stand together. We will meet the moment, I'm sure of it. My colleagues and I at Ocean Conservancy believe that, and that's why we work to achieve it every day. If we want to keep the beating heart of Florida alive, we must act. Just as the Everglades and the ocean are connected, so are we. We are part of this story and part of its future. What the future looks like is up to us.